Welcome everyone, and I will turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm Chris Weigard in the Richmond chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. Welcome everyone to our event, Flood Resilience, What Virginia Homeowners Should Know. At Citizens Climate Lobby, our mission is to build political will for climate solutions. We desire a future that is livable for all, irrespective of their position in society or where they live. We're a nonpartisan volunteer organization. We use lobbying, media relations, and grassroots outreach, grasstops outreach, and group development as levers to move our mission forward. We educate ourselves and our fellow community members about how we can address climate change and its impacts. In Virginia, we especially worry about how climate change might lead to more flooding. So tonight, we'll learn about proactive steps that homeowners and residents can take to make our homes more resilient. Flooding can happen anywhere in Virginia, and climate change is expected to increase this risk over coming years. In coastal communities like Norfolk, sea levels are projected to rise by about 1 to 2 feet by the year 2050. That's according to the Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences. And looking beyond 2050, sea level rise will depend on how quickly the world cuts its greenhouse gas emissions. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, failing to curb future emissions could cause an additional 1.5 to 5 feet of sea level rise for a total of 3.5 to 7 feet by the end of this century. It's not just coastal communities that are affected. Researchers at Old Dominion University found that heavy rainstorms have been happening more often across Virginia since 1947. This trend is expected to continue and storms will likely become more intense. For example, the Fairfax County government released a report projecting that by 2050, a 25-year storm could drop nearly an inch more rain than a 25-year storm today. Virginia's communities along rivers and in the mountains may be especially vulnerable to these heavier rainstorm events. Our deep conviction is that the flooding threat requires both efforts to adapt and efforts to reduce the carbon emissions that drive the process. We also view this as an issue that transcends partisanship. It's our hope that today's presentations from the panel of experts and the question and answer session that will follow will empower you to improve the resilience of your home and your community. And we hope you'll consider supporting CCL as a volunteer. Our first presenter will be Mary-Carson Stiff, Policy Director with Wetlands Watch. Mary-Carson will discuss what homeowners should know about flood insurance. Who should get flood insurance? What can you do to reduce your flood insurance costs? How has the National Flood Insurance Program recently changed? Our second presenter will be Jay Ford, Virginia Policy and Grassroots Advisor with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Jay will discuss state-level funding and programs to promote flood resilience in Virginia, including funding through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Our final presenter will be Andrea McClellan. She serves on the Norfolk City Council. Andrea will share her work in the city of Norfolk and across Virginia to address flooding challenges, and she'll describe what homeowners and residents can do to promote solutions and advocate for changes at the local, regional, and state level. Please use the chat during these presentations to ask questions. We will ask as many of these questions as time allows following the presentations from the panelists. So let me introduce our first presenter, Mary-Carson Stiff with Wetlands Watch.
Okay, can everybody see my screen and hear me? Thumbs up, awesome. Good evening, my name is Mary-Carson Stiff. As Chris mentioned, the Policy Director at Wetlands Watch. We are a nonprofit based in Norfolk, Virginia, but we work statewide on conservation issues, especially those related to wetlands loss in the face of sea level rise. We are deeply concerned about the projections that Chris kind of opened this whole webinar with as they relate to wetlands losses. So there's quite a range of projections, but we can kind of safely say that we're looking at anywhere between 50 to 89% of our tidal wetlands being lost to sea level rise. The reason that is that they cannot grow vertically to keep pace with sea level rise. Our rates of sea level rise are higher than their vertical accretion rates. And so they have to grow horizontally into the landscape. And that, of course, is a problem when our landscape looks like the image that you can see on my slide deck. This is from my neighborhood in Norfolk, Virginia, during a higher high tide event, not a storm, just high tides with some wind. So we are living this risk firsthand and working at the ground on how to identify solutions to this problem. I'm going to be talking about flood insurance, which may seem odd given all of the work that I just explained Wetlands Watch does. But what we discovered was that people really didn't care about protecting wetlands. People really care about things that impact their pocketbook. And we decided to focus on the National Flood Insurance Program as a way to advance adaptation to climate change and sea level rise. And the reason this has worked really well is that all of our high risk areas for sea level rise inundation are located in areas that are mapped as high flood risk by the National Flood Insurance Program. And when the National Flood Insurance Program maps these areas of high risk, local governments have to regulate land use based on those maps. So that's the entryway into decision making and influencing change. And that's why we are very deeply clued in the insurance world. So I'm going to hit every single topic that Chris mentioned in a pretty straightforward way. So what do you need to know about flood insurance? Well, it's not included in your homeowner's insurance. So if you don't receive a bill from a flood insurance company, you don't have it. And that is a really misunderstood fact. And please let everyone you know. This is especially important because if you do not have flood insurance and a disaster hits and your home is impacted, you are going to get very, very, very limited support from FEMA, if FEMA comes in at all and offers support. That's not a given. I've included this chart because I think it's really important for folks to understand that if you don't have National Flood Insurance Program coverage and a disaster strikes, your out of pocket is going to be significant without that coverage. So it is not only the case that you'll receive less resources from FEMA to help yourself get back on your feet, to help address the damage to your home, but the community may not receive any disaster assistance. And we have seen this with the two most recent floods in Southwest Virginia. FEMA has declared that those impacts were not significant enough to warrant FEMA disaster assistance at a high level. And so many of these community members and homeowners have zero support. They may have had their hotel room covered for about 3 days, and that's the extent of what FEMA is willing to do to support them. So this is really important, and it's critical to your financial resilience. It's critical to your physical resilience to make sure you have insurance. So in addition to this, the definition of a flood is very complicated. We saw this most notably with Hurricane Katrina. A hurricane can blow your roof off, and then you can flood inside because you have no roof and it's raining like crazy. Hurricane coverage, which is a part of your homeowner's insurance, would not pay out in this instance. So it gets increasingly complicated, as you can probably imagine. And so all the more reason to get flood insurance. So I'm saying flood insurance, but what I really mean is the National Flood Insurance Program, flood insurance, which is public and it is available almost everywhere. But there is also private flood insurance, and that's a different beast altogether. As I mentioned, most coverage is through the National Flood Insurance Program, but private flood insurance companies are very popular. They are offering
Oh, sorry, Mary-Carson, your video is breaking up a little bit.
but the really important thing that everybody should remember, and this is not an insurance company act by saying. My internet connection is bad.
Oh, just it broke up a little bit. If you might try turning off your video and the audio will go through, I think.
Perfect.
Great, thank you.
Would love to do that anyway. Great. Okay. So private insurance companies may not have the backing of federal banks and state banks. And so this is a really big problem. And we've seen this very recently with Hurricane Ian, which caused 6 companies, private flood insurance companies, to go bankrupt. So this is a really big problem. While flood insurance that's privatized may be less expensive and very attractive to property owners, it is not necessarily the safest bet. And so the National Flood Insurance Program, for all of its problems, is probably what folks should inform others to move forward with. So who should get flood insurance? Everybody, where it can rain, it can flood. Climate change is modifying weather patterns, making our impacts far more significant. And this is exacerbating all sorts of issues as we experience rain bombs, and we see increased nuisance flooding due to sea level rise. So this is what nuisance flooding looks like in Norfolk, Virginia, for example, and we're seeing about 45 annual days of nuisance flooding where the road is impassable like this is again my neighborhood. And I think that why this matters is the water is coming up and there's no place for it to go. And what we're seeing is that outdated infrastructure, such as storm drains, are making this problem worse and making the impacts much worse. So in Norfolk, we have storm drains where the water is standing pretty much up at the road level 24/7, and then you get a higher high tide and the water does not come from the side. It doesn't come over the banks of a flood wall. It's coming out through our storm drains. And you can see some wetland species are starting to live right at the storm drain level. And this is now technically jurisdictional wetlands. So it gets real sketchy kind of fast. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is what people can do to reduce flood insurance costs. And the most kind of best well-known way is through flood mitigation measures. So installing flood vents, elevating your heating, your hot water heater, and some of your other utilities, and then elevating your structure, whole hog. So this is obviously going to keep you safe. And it used to be the case that this was really reducing your cost of your annual flood insurance premium, but that has changed some, and we're going to talk about why that change has happened. Now, even if the flood insurance cost is going down less than it was in the past, it's really important because these measures are reducing the impacts of flood risk to your property. So it's going to keep your property safe so you don't blow out your foundation during a flood event. And then it's also going to keep your contents safe, which is going to help you be more economically resilient after a disaster event. The other big program that helps reduce flood insurance costs, and from the group that is gathered here today, you'll likely be most interested in the Community Rating System Program, or the CRS. And this is a program that is voluntary that local governments can elect to join. And when they join, they're agreeing to do more than what the minimum standards are as required by the National Flood Insurance Program. So I mentioned that local governments are on the hook to regulate land use based on where FEMA draws those flood maps. And if they do more than what they have to do just to be in the program, then they are awarded with points. And those points translate to annual flood insurance discounts for policyholders. And this is a big deal because the actions that are earning points are actually helping reduce risk and spreading awareness of flood risk generally. And in turn, you're making people happy that live in your community because you're saving them money. So it's a win-win all around. I mentioned that I'd talk about the recent changes in flood insurance. This is a really kind of complicated and very easily kind of wonky change. And so I'm going to try to keep it as sort of high level as possible without going into too many details. Basically, what has happened is that FEMA has decided that the way in which they were determining flood insurance rates is going to change. And this is definitely important because the way that they were rating flood insurance premiums was based on methodology developed 50 years ago. So they had not changed the way in which they were calculating our flood insurance premiums and the rate of your actual insurance in far too long. So it's an overdue change, but it is a pretty massive shift. And the National Flood Insurance Program is quite a beast of a program, so it's a big ship to be churning. So the big takeaway is that the rates are no longer based on flood zones that are defined on those flood maps that I was talking about. They're based on a lot of additional principles that we're going to talk a little bit more about. There is no more grandfathering. So you might have heard people talk about the fact that, well, I have a grandfathered rate, so it's very inexpensive, and I live in an old house and I'm getting a break. Well, that's no longer the case. They're getting rid of the subsidized rates. There are no more cheap voluntary policies. So it was the case that if you had a house and it was right outside of those flood zones as defined on the map, then you weren't required to carry flood insurance because you weren't living in a structure that was located within those high risk zones. You had what was called a voluntary policy or a preferred risk policy. And this new rating structure eliminates that altogether. So while you may not be required to carry flood insurance because you're not living in a high risk flood zone, you no longer have the benefit of that voluntary cheap policy. Your policy is going to be more reflective of the other rating characteristics that are going into the new rating method. So these rates are factoring in lots of different things, as I've mentioned. And one of the biggest things is the value of your structure. And that's a big deal because FEMA's really trying to make the National Flood Insurance Program more equitable for policyholders. And we think that they've done a really nice job at achieving that goal. Policyholders under this new change are going to begin paying what they're calling full risk rates. So it's supposed to be better data informing better risk, and those risks are going to be the actual full risk. And so you're no longer subsidizing risk. People are paying what they should based off of where their structure is located. Everything is subject to congressional caps, and the congressional caps were established in 2013, 2014, where basically Congress said, okay, well, you can increase flood insurance rates, but you can only do it 18% if it's a primary residence, or 25% if it's a business or a second home, basically. So these annual increases are not wild in the sense that, it could be astronomical. It is limited to 18% for most people. So why is this change important? Well, this methodology is really outdated, as I mentioned. It's from the 1970s. There's new science and new technology that's available, and this creates a more accurate perception of risk. This is important because these flood zones are just lines on the map. Flood water goes wherever it wants, and flood risk is far more complicated than easily drawn, understood lines on a map. The other issue is this equity. This replacement cost is really, really important because policyholders were paying far too much, and I'll provide an example of that. The other big issue is debt. So the National Flood Insurance Program, $20.5 billion in debt. It has been in far more debt, but Congress keeps forgiving the debt. So it's sort of like fake forgiveness, right? It is incredibly in debt, and the debt is being serviced by the NFIP, and the interest is being paid by the premiums. And so there's got to be something done to remedy this situation. It's just untenable. The preferred risk policies were far too cheap. They're about $500 a year, which is very inexpensive for some high risk areas. So the old rating methodology, we talked about that. The new rating methodology is about distance to a water body, commercially available data that is basically actuarial data informed by situational storms, modeling of what the damage will be when storms hit in specific locations, and then things like construction type, foundation type, and then the specific type of flood rather than just a regular flood. This is looking at some rainfall flooding as well. So the big change as far as the average person's understanding of what it means to them is that they can no longer pull up a map and say, okay, well, I know that I'm in the blue, which means I have a high risk policy, and I can expect to pay far more than if I was in the orange, which is outside of the flood risk zone. So this has been completely thrown out and shouldn't really be looked at in terms of rate. One of the biggest, there are a couple big rating factors that I'm going to cover. One is the distance to the flooding source. And so the blue house is going to pay more than the green house. It's just that simple. And before, in the old rating methodology, this did not matter at all. This is the equity piece. The replacement cost value is significant. A $2 million valued home and a $250,000 valued home, we're paying the exact same annual premium. And this is a terrible situation for the National Flood Insurance Program to be in, and a terrible situation for this homeowner to be in. So they have absolutely done away with that. And this property owner policyholder will now pay significantly less. So how is it working in practice? Your rate is basically all that model data plus what the insurance agent is actually putting into a website. And that information includes like square footage and replacement costs and things like that. So square footage seems to have the biggest impact on cost, which is again, getting at that equity piece, which is really important and very, very good. Basements oddly have a very small impact on cost, which is a little strange and maybe not so smart. Mitigation measures are having a very small impact on cost. And I think the idea is that even if your house is elevated and you're in a very high risk zone, you're really not safe, right? Your contents might be safe, but your risk is still significant. Elevation certificates, this is where we're getting into a little bit more of the wonky stuff. They help, but they have a minor impact on your cost. And so we're still encouraging people to get them, but they're not always making a really big difference. It's something that we're just sort of telling people. It's impossible to estimate what your rating is going to be. And this is making it very difficult for real estate professionals to offer some guidance to prospective home buyers. Policies are reaching full risk rate, the majority by year 10. So everybody's rates are kind of increasing and they're going up slowly based off of those congressional caps. Nationally, I think it's important to note that most policies are increasing. The green is immediate decreases. So this is that equity group, but most everybody else is increasing. In Virginia, we have a little bit more of a split. So a lot of people are paying way more than they should have, but the majority of Virginians, again, are going to see increases. And it's interesting to note that most, or not most, about, a little bit, essentially half of our property owners, policyholders in Virginia were already paying the full risk rate. And so the biggest impact are going to be our high-risk coastal zones, subsidized homes, and then these preferred risk policies that I mentioned. Voluntary policies are going to go up the most. Our favorite benefit of Risk Rating 2.0 is that now the National Flood Insurance Program's community rating system, that's that economic incentive program I mentioned that local governments can be enrolled in to reduce flood insurance premiums annually for policyholders. This discount is now available to every single policyholder in the community. And under the old rating system, it was only available to those people who had policies in those high risk flood zones. So this is a big deal. And it's really important for folks to know that if you live in a CRS community, your local government is taking aggressive actions to help increase flood risk, increase safety, and help you save money on your flood insurance. So that's all I've got. I really appreciate it. I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary-Carson. And next we are excited to welcome Jay Ford from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And Jay, let me know if you have any trouble sharing your screen or if you have slides you'd like to share.
Thanks so much. Can you all hear me? I'll take a thumbs up from somebody. Excellent. Oliver, I love the painting in your house. Before I start, just want to go ahead and note that and then get my slides up here. So while I'm getting these loaded, as Stephanie said, I'm Jay Ford. I'm with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and I'm our Virginia Policy Advisor. I work on a lot of legislative and regulatory affairs for the Bay Foundation. And many of you may be wondering, why does the Bay Foundation have a strong interest in the question of flooding and climate and resilience? And I've had some people tell me, stay in your lane. But as I explained to them, it kind of is our lane. If you've ever heard of the Bay Foundation, you know that our motto is Save the Bay. And no matter how you slice the climate question, it is a direct impact to the Chesapeake Bay. If we're talking about reducing emissions from fossil fuel, today, right now, 16% of nitrogen to the Chesapeake Bay comes from airborne fossil fuel sources. It is a substantial impact to the water quality in our region. And if you flip it and look at it from the other direction, in terms of the effects of climate change, we have a lot of the things that Mary-Carson just touched on, these nuisance flooding. There's strong research now that shows that the preponderance of nuisance flooding is pulling all of the things that are on the streets and in people's yards back into the bay. So it's exacerbating that sort of runoff issue. And so right now, as we head towards our goals of 2025, we're already accounting for an additional 9 million tons of nitrogen, which is directly attributable to climate change. And that is from things like nuisance flooding. It's from things like the rain bombs that Mary-Carson referenced as rain events increase in both frequency and duration. And those trend lines are going to continue to go. So when someone says, why is CBF here? We're here because we can't save the bay if we don't handle climate change. If we don't both handle the emission side and the mitigation side, they are inextricably linked to our mission. And so that is why you were looking at me. Also, you were looking at me in this because I got into the house like 30 seconds before we started. But I do want you to know the tie was also for you. So let me get my slide up and we'll talk a little bit about what skin the state of Virginia has in the game, and where I think we need to go in the coming years as well. All right, let's start this thing. Okay, can everyone see my slides? A thumbs up if you can see it. Excellent, perfect. So we talked a little bit about this already. This is a restaurant in my community, the Island House. I felt the irony was overwhelming of the island house being an actual island during, this was not a particularly strong storm event. This was a normal nor'easter, but it also really highlights the issue for the state of Virginia is our businesses, our day-to-day life is being disrupted to such a level that Virginia has had to step up and say, we need to start putting financial resources into this because we're losing money. Even if you don't believe in climate change, even if you think sea level rise is a hoax, we're losing money and people believe in tax base. And so, you know, when restaurants like this are out of business for a week due to nuisance flooding, legislators start to pay attention. So in the last couple of years, we have seen a dramatic uptick in terms of resilience related legislation and programs here in Virginia that are directly trying to provide resources to both community scale as well as homeowners to begin to adjust and adapt to climate impacts. So I won't dwell on this because Mary-Carson touched on some of it, but I do think the numbers are eye-popping. Virginia just finished our Coastal Resilience Master Plan just last year. And in that plan, then they projected that the number of residents living in homes exposed to major coastal flooding is projected to grow from 360,000 to almost 1 million people in Virginia. Virginia has a little over 7 million people. So again, 1 in 7 people in over the coming decades. Additionally, the number of miles of roadways exposed to chronic coastal flooding is projected to increase. Again, shutting down businesses, shutting down people's ability to go to school. 3 weeks ago, I guess, when the hurricane did not hit Virginia, where I live on the Eastern Shore, school was closed for 4 days, even though we didn't get hit because of increased flooding. So I want to talk about a couple of different funds. This one might not seem directly related, but I would argue it is, and is becoming increasingly related to resilience issues, and that's the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund. And we're going to sort of start big and then work down to the House level. So the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund is a fund that is administered by the Department of Environmental Quality here in Virginia, and this is to help localities deal with stormwater problems. The issue is the state has never differentiated between what was a normal, old-timey stormwater and what's new climate-related stormwater because we had a rain bomb or because it connected to nuisance flooding and created a compound issue in a community. And so we are seeing more and more communities in Virginia utilize the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund in order to alleviate flooding issues that are, of course, related to climate impacts. And so this is a critical fund. It's one that has been very, I'll say, up and down in terms of funding. Some general assemblies put a healthy amount of dollars in there. Others zero it out, depending on where the budget stands that year. But it's something that we really need to have consistent funding in because it's an important tool for your locality to come to, you know, here, this is a intersection in Richmond that it was impassable for half of this day. And so for homeowners in Virginia that are looking for solutions to passable roads in their neighborhood, they can identify these trouble spots. If you live, you know, if you're in Virginia Beach, your city's going through a massive process right now, or if you're in Arlington and Alexandria, they're just starting those conversations, but you can identify key intersections, key neighborhoods that are flooding where you might live, and they can, the locality has the ability to go after these dollars through this fund and help alleviate issues in your particular neighborhood. These are honestly our only funds that are truly dedicated to resilience in Virginia. And I want to say right at the outset that they're critically important and yet also pitifully small in terms of the need. When you think of the need in Virginia, it's in the billions in order for us to truly respond to climate change impacts. But these funds have had a couple $100 million come into it, and it's been sliced and diced and moved around, but they are still really critical starting points and things that we're hopefully going to be able to build on here in Virginia. So each of them has a distinct purpose. The first is the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. And this fund was set up with the legislation that joined Virginia to RGGI. So I'm assuming, given the theme of your group, that everyone knows the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, but those RGGI proceeds, 45% of them are taken off the top and they go to the Community Flood Preparedness Fund here in Virginia. Another 50% go to energy efficiency programs in Virginia, and then the rest gets used in some kind of administrative soup that goes to both DCR and the Department of Environmental Quality for monitoring greenhouse gas emissions in the state. So the Community Flood Preparedness Fund is key, though. This was our first resilience fund, and this is the first time that a locality, any political subdivision in Virginia, can go to the state, specifically to the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and say, we have got a flooding issue. We have got either coastal flooding or recurrent flooding due to intense rainfall, and we can build a plan. We can build our first climate resilience plan using these dollars. We can do a shovel-ready project using these dollars, provided we have a plan in place. And so for the first time, you can address climate resilience through a grant fund here in Virginia. And the projects that have gone out all across the state are amazing so far. We've gone through 2.5 grant rounds, I'll say. We're still waiting on the second half of grant round 3, but these have helped communities like those Mary-Carson mentioned out in the Valley that never thought they would have to develop a response to climate impacts. It never occurred to them to have a resilience plan. They are now able to develop these plans and hopefully model future weather patterns and be better prepared so we don't end up with catastrophic outcomes, which are much more expensive. We end up solving the problem on the front end and saving both the taxpayers and these communities a lot of heartache. And so the Community Flood Preparedness Fund has a number of unique features. It is all the money comes from RGGI. Can't stress that enough. We really have to stay in RGGI. It is built into the name that it is community flood preparedness. So projects through that fund really should be scaled to a community level, which in most locations is very doable. If you live in a coastal community, it's pretty common that you're able to identify a single inundation point for where flood's coming in. So you can build a project that will help protect multiple homes or a whole community. And that's really what they envisioned here, is that we were working on the scale that will protect a lot of people instead of just individual homeowners or individual businesses. Other thing that was really important with this fund is they said in code that 25%, no less than 25% of the funds in each grant round need to go to, Oliver, I cannot read the message, but I'd like to. So no less than 25% of the funds have to go to low-income communities. And so they built that equity piece into code for this fund. Again, another critical piece. And then for our purposes in the Bay world, they said there's going to be a strong preference for nature-based design. So how does your community learn to live with the water? Because we have got to start utilizing nature-based design to not only make resilient communities, but make sure that we also still have resilient natural resources at the same time. And nature-based design, it can migrate over time. So your community doesn't have to keep going back to the well every couple of years and saying, give us tens of millions of dollars from new concrete because the water passed the last concrete. So the focus on nature-based design is both an economic and ecological decision. And so those are some of the cornerstones of the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. The other fund here is the Resilient Virginia Revolving Loan Fund. And I'll be brief because it doesn't actually exist yet. It just has some money and was created in code. So this came out of the last session. I will say, unfortunately, legislators chose to put money in this fund by taking it out of the other fund. And so we didn't actually grow the total pot of resilience and flooding dollars in Virginia. We sort of bifurcated them. And so the Resilient Virginia Revolving Loan Fund has a couple of unique features. One, it includes model legislation to allow it to receive federal dollars, which is very important because there's a lot of that floating around right now. And this fund was really designed to help at a more targeted level. So how do you help an individual homeowner? How do you help an individual business? And it does not have the same strong preference for community scale that you find in the CFPF. So both of these key funds, they both exclusively have been funded via RGGI funds. Just so I say it one more time, Virginia will have no resilience dollars as of next year if we get out of RGGI. It just dries up overnight. And I'll take a quick soapbox stand and say, our biggest issue with resilience is that we have not been able to consistently integrate it into government. So the last time I checked, there is no expiration date on sea level rise in the foreseeable future. And yet we keep trying to deal with it as if it's something you could do a one-time grant and it will just be solved. And instead, it really needs to be integrated into local government, into state government, and into all of the procedures and policies and programs that come out of these entities. And you can't do that if your funding is in constant starts and fits. You have a disaster, you get a slug of federal money, and you say, great, we'll fix this shoreline, problem solved. It doesn't work like that. You need dedicated personnel. You need a plan that's constantly being updated. And you can only do that with consistent funding. And that's why CFPF has been so critical, because it's not only providing a revenue source to localities that apply, it's also funding staff at our state for the first time who are looking at these issues constantly. So I can't stress enough how important it is. And I'm worried that some folks don't realize just how important it is that we have to stay in RGGI, because it is driving the entire show right now in resilience. All right, off my soapbox, down to your yard. This is one of my favorite funds because you got a lot of flexibility with this one. This is VCAP, or the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program. This is a grant program that is administered through Virginia soil and water conservation districts. Most of Virginia is covered by a soil and water conservation district, but if you are not, and this is an important thing to find out and ask your local officials about, if you are not in a Virginia soil and water conservation district, you can create a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, between your locality and the closest soil and water district. These exist in a couple of places around the state, and that will give your city access to the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program. So this is really specifically designed for homeowners. This entire program is for what you can do in your yard to mitigate flooding. So the list it's pretty extensive. Some of the things we have here are rain gardens, bioretention swales, permeable pavers. If you already have put down impervious surface, they can give you money to rip it up, because it's so important for infiltration that you get that up and put something else down. Lately, they have funded a lot of living shorelines, and all of these are significant, 75%, 80% of the project. They take on the vast majority of cost for these projects, and each of them have, this is coming out of soil and water, so they usually have a soil and water benefit, but the vast majority of them are also resilience and flood prevention measures. So they have rain barrels. You can plant your whole yard in native plants, and if you grade it right, they will pay you for that. It's really quite a fantastic program. It is I would argue undercapitalized right now. It's just a couple of $1 million each year, but it has been growing. It has been growing over the last couple of General Assembly sessions. I think in part because it is wildly popular with the people that participate in it. When you get a brand new bioretention swale in your yard and it is full of gorgeous pollinators, it is very hard for you to not go out and tell everybody what a wonderful program this is. So VCAP is something I hope we see continue to grow in the coming years, because this is one of the easiest ways for someone to do something directly in their yard to help deal with excess floodwater and/or these intense rain events. And by and large, they add value to your property as well as ecological benefits for both water and soil health. So they're a win-win-win in all different directions. And I think, yes, that is where I'm at. So I look forward to questions as well, and I will stop my share here.
Great. Thank you so much, Jay. Yes, everyone, please put any questions that you have for any of our panelists in the chat, and we'll be sure to ask those after everyone's done speaking. Thanks again, Jay. And we will turn now to Andrea McClellan, who is a member of the Norfolk City Council. We're so delighted to welcome you, Andrea.
Thanks all. So y'all have had such great presentations thus far. I mean, Mary-Carson, Jay, I was sitting there in the background going, yes, 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 yes. So I'm not sure how much more I have to offer, but I'm going to bring it to the perspective from the local, state, and federal elected official perspective. And hopefully that spurs some questions, et cetera. So I just thank you for the opportunity to be here. Yes, so I do serve on the Norfolk City Council. I also serve on the joint subcommittee on coastal flooding. I serve on the Chesapeake Bay Programs Local Government Advisory Committee. I also co-chaired Norfolk's Commission on Climate Change Mitigation, where we wrote the region, so Hampton Roads region's first climate action plan. So this is near and dear to my heart. And I just want to amplify what Mary-Carson said, which is if it rains where you live, you should have flood insurance. Number one. Number two, and I don't have slides, so y'all are just going to have to deal with me tonight. So it's all good. In terms of a climate crisis or climate disaster, it's not an if, it's a when. And I don't believe this was discussed, but Hurricane Matthew, which hit Virginia Beach in 2016, 70% of the homes that were affected were not in a special flood hazard zone. What does that mean? They were not required to have flood insurance. So when we talk about coastal flooding, we need to realize that it's not just coastal flooding. A lot of this flooding is inland, and that was discussed with Mary-Carson's comments about these rain bombs, et cetera. So again, I'm just going to reiterate, everybody needs to be thinking about flood insurance, and also thinking about what you can do on your personal property to what we call in Norfolk, retain your rain, right? Government can't do everything. So what can you do as an individual homeowner? How can you become more sponge-like? How can you retain the water on your property so it doesn't overflow our stormwater system? So we've got a great program in the city of Norfolk. If you just Google Retain Your Rain Norfolk, you can see some more information about that. We have an app where you can actually see how many bathtubs fill with stormwater and the things that you can do to mitigate that in terms of all the things that we've already been discussed, whether it's rain barrels or rain gardens, et cetera. So those are all very, very important things. One of the things that I'm very proud that we did within the General Assembly, and I don't think this has been discussed thus far, and I think it's really, really important, is that as of January 1st this year, there is now a requirement to disclose previous flood claims when you sell a house. That's a big deal. It took us 3 to 4 years because the realtors didn't want to do this, but they didn't. Everybody just assumes, well, of course you can get that information because, Virginia is a buyer beware state. So that means that, you can get this information on your own. Well, no, you can not get previous flood claims from FEMA unless you are the homeowner. So you're buying a house or a property, you have no idea what happened before you. So what does that mean? That means if there were 2, 3, 4 claims prior to you. So an instance here, just around the corner from me, young couple bought their first house. I live in Norfolk, obviously. I live in the area called Ghent, which is the area wherever all the news reporters go to whenever there's a flooding story. And they knew that their flood insurance was high. They knew they lived in an area that flooded, that they got that information in advance. They had one claim a year after they flooded. They didn't know that the previous owners had 3 claims. That one claim put them into a severe repetitive loss category. So their flood insurance went from $3,600 to $9,000. They had no idea because there was no requirement to disclose. We should have this at the federal level. The NFIP program, the National Flood Insurance Program, should require this, but until we have that at the state level, we need to require that. So it's not perfect. The requirement is that if you've had 2 flood claims in a rolling 10-year period of $1,000 or more, you have to disclose that. That's good. It's not great, but it's much better than where it was. So that's very, very important. Some of the other things that we have done at the state level that we've tried to do locally. So I also serve as the chair of the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, which represents the 17 municipalities of Hampton Roads. Last year, we lobbied really hard on the creation of a Commonwealth Flood Board. The whole idea here is that the state, the Commonwealth, needs to have a comprehensive perspective of flooding. Right now, it is siloed in Secretary of Natural Resources. It's not terrible, but it could be better. Because flooding also affects emergency management, commerce, transportation, so many other areas, agriculture. And so we don't have this opportunity to really think about this comprehensively. So in my ideal situation, like the Commonwealth Transportation Board, we should be thinking about flooding at a more holistic level and a regional level, because flooding is really watershed based. It's not based on geographic political boundaries. It's really based on the watershed. Mother Nature is going to do what she's going to do. She's not going to know if she's in Norfolk or Virginia Beach. So why are we not thinking about that from a regional perspective like we do for transportation planning? So ideally, this is where I would like to see the state go. Jay mentioned Reggie and the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. He's absolutely right. This has got to stay there. There has never been dedicated funding for flooding until that happened. But to his point, it is not nearly enough. So Norfolk alone, we've identified $1.8 billion in tidal flooding projects, add another $1 billion in stormwater flooding projects. And you're talking about a statewide fund that is, giving $200 million for the state. It is a great start for capacity building, but it is not nearly enough. So that's very important as well. As homeowners, though, which is the topic here tonight, I would just say, everybody here is involved. You're here because you want to learn more, but you've got to demand of your local elected officials, your state officials, and federal, they've got to get into this issue. It is not an if, it is a when. I'm going to go back to that. This is such a huge, huge issue, and nobody's paying attention to this. Congressman Bobby Scott said recently in an event that I was at, he said, long-term issues don't have constituencies, because we're all worried about what's happening right now. But before we know it, it is going to happen. Again, Virginia Beach, Hurricane Matthew, 70% of those homes not in a flood hazard zone. This is happening in Virginia, the southwestern part of the state, the central part of the state. This is happening in our Commonwealth right now. And I just don't think we have enough elected leaders talking about this. We do have some things otherwise going on. We talked about the CRS system, the community rating system. Thank you, Mary-Carson Stiff. I don't think Mary-Carson actually talked about Norfolk specifically, but I'm really proud in Norfolk. because of our CRS rating, we have reduced flood insurance policies in Norfolk by 25%. That's huge. That's a huge number. And we're not stopping there. We hope to get it up to 35 or 40%. I see, I think Jim Reddick was on here earlier. I don't know, Jim, if you're still here. Jim is our Director of Emergency Management. He's been a huge help in this as well. We've also looked at our zoning code. So you should get, hi, Jim. I see a waving hand. Thank you. You know, our local zoning code. So we have improved that significantly. Well, not if your home builders association doesn't think so, but we've required a lot more of retention of stormwater on properties. And so if you're going to build in Norfolk, you have a lot, you get a higher bar to create more resilience. At the Commonwealth level, we need to improve our building code statewide to really incorporate resilience. And that has not been the case by far for sure. Trying to think of other things that I've put in here. Oh, something that we have that isn't at the residential level, but could be. We have something called PACE, Property Assisted Clean Energy, which in Virginia includes resilience measures and stormwater measures, but it's only available for commercial or nonprofit entities. It's not for residential. What does that do? It provides a financing mechanism to make it easier and less expensive to implement resilience measures on your properties. Unfortunately, it doesn't include residential properties. That is something that we should be thinking about long-term in the Commonwealth, because it might be an opportunity to create incentives, financial incentives for homeowners to work through that as well. So anyway, I just would encourage each and every one of you, you're obviously involved because you're here tonight, but talk about resilience at the local level. Make sure that your local elected officials know the importance of this. Lobby at the statewide level. Jay Ford, we keep talking about it, and hopefully this is the year. We're going to be rain boots for resilience. We're going to try and do a lobby day at the General Assembly to talk about this. And also obviously at the federal level too. There is no way that we can tackle this issue unless we have local, state, and federal elected officials at the table. So with that, I will turn it over to our moderator and be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Andrea. So one question that we got from Charlie Grimes for Mary-Carson was and I think this is for the community rating system, I believe. So for a community to improve from class 7 to class 8 and 9, what must the county supervisors do differently? And I'm not sure which exact county, but if you could maybe speak to that, Mary-Carson.
Sure. Yes, I just had a visitor from my house who is a child. So hold on one second. I will be in 1 minute. Okay.
Yeah, you're welcome to listen in.
One thing that it makes answering this question really difficult is that there are countless things that a community can do to improve their class score. In the chat, I dropped a link to a list of all the different activities that earn credits. So just to give people kind of an idea of how varied these point earning activities can be. And so one of the ways that we've seen communities really jump in points is capturing open space. And that is, what I mean by that is, in Virginia, we have the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, which requires that local property owners cannot impact the 100-foot buffer and the water features that go waterward of that landward buffer. And so one of the things that Wetlands Watch has been working really hard on is ensuring that the local governments that are in the CRS program are earning points for that protection if the local government is actually enforcing it. And so you can earn credits for the acreage of all of those 100-foot buffers if the local government is, again, enforcing those buffers. I mentioned the title, the water features that go, waterward of that landward buffer. And that's basically our wetlands in Virginia. And those features are also eligible for credit in the CRS program. And so in Virginia, I think the last slide that I showed, the overwhelming number of points statewide are coming from this activity of submitting the acreage of our natural buffers and our wetlands features for credit in the CRS program. And what local governments have said to us is, well, sometimes there's a lot of, it's politically difficult for us to say no to a proposed impact in the buffer or in the wetlands, God forbid. And our earning of these points is actually giving up political capital to say to a prospective, impact, hey, we really are relying on the points that we're earning for protecting against development in this buffer. And so we think that, what an awesome political tool this actually turns out to be. It's helping our local communities do the job that they're tasked to do through state law. So that's one way that communities have jumped significantly. James City County earns 3 full classes, which is 15% from capturing and submitting for credit these 100-foot buffers plus our wetland features. So this is a big savings here.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, please keep adding questions to the chat if you have any, or if you have follow-up questions. So another question we got was from Kelly Garner, and I think this is for Jay. So Newport News is not covered by a soil and water conservation district. Why might that be? How would an MOU change that? And who would be a starting point person for that? What can Newport News residents do to access VCAP?
Yeah. So I guess starting at the why might that be? It's because you don't have a lot of farms. So our soil and water conservation districts were largely created to administer the VACS, the Virginia Agricultural Cost Share Program, as well as earlier in their inception, some stormwater programs. Actually, a lot of the flooding work used to reside at that board. They've been around since the 30s, but they have been really focused on rural communities. And so as time has gone on, a lot of our urban areas have been left out. And there's, at a certain point, the difference between whether or not you had one really came down to majority minority cities, if I'm going to be blunt. If you look around the state, the cities that are not included in a soil and water district are all majority minority. For example, Virginia Beach is included in a soil and water district. Norfolk is not. And I don't want to prescribe causation, but I will say once you sign an MOU, your city usually pays a portion of the staffer that's assisting for VCAP or whatever the program is. And a lot of our urban communities really couldn't justify the cost. And so some chicken egg there, but that's really what has driven the lack of participation in urban communities. So Portsmouth, Norfolk, Petersburg, Richmond until fairly recently joined Henricopolis, which is one of these groups. So I think that's the why. And so in order to start the process, you really have to go straight to your council. This is an agreement that has to be struck between your locality as well as the district. The closest district has to agree to sign this MOU. A lot of times this will then go up to the state soil and water board for approval, but that's pretty pro forma. So I think speaking to your council member is always the right place to start, but generally for this MOU process, and I know a number of localities are exploring it right now.
So Jay, can I add to that? Yeah, I mean, I am, I've been thinking about this for Norfolk, and honestly, it's sort of the Virginia first cities, the urban cities. I mean, we just, and you also, I had a note here also talk about SLAF funding, stormwater local assistance funding. That's also not really been a great source of funding for urban areas just because of the nature of how those are determined. So that's a real issue. And I don't even know, why is it that we have to have an MOU? Why can we not create a new district? Maybe because of the determination of the agricultural portion?
You can create a new district. There's nothing in code that would prevent you from doing so. Similarly, if someone wants to create a new district, that would go before the state Soil and Water Conservation Board. We do have some districts that have, you know, a more robust mix of urban and rural. I think the requirements for staffing and startup costs are usually the deterrent, and that's why most localities opt for a MOU instead.
So Jay is helping me make the point that you've got to get involved. You've got to lobby your elected officials, because I can tell you, I'm pretty sure that maybe, I would hope it's not the case, but most of my council members have never heard of PCAP and probably don't even know what a soil and water conservation district is. So we need you all. And I'm looking, I know Greg Reck is on here. He's one of my constituents. So Greg, we need you and others to get involved and to lobby at the local level and say, this is why we need to have access to VCAP funds so that we can do these things locally. So Jay, thank you for helping me make the point. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and I can confirm I'm currently on the state soil and water board, and I can tell you most urban localities don't know we exist with a high degree of certainty.
Thank you. Yes, I had never heard of this. So I'm, you know, definitely, I will try to be helpful in my locality as well to promote. I need to check if we are in a district. So another question that we got was, so in the federal funding in the infrastructure law and I guess also the Inflation Reduction Act, any recent major legislation from the federal government, are you seeing help for flood resilience in those recent laws passed by Congress?
Yeah. So,
Okay,
Andrew,
Jay, do you want to take this or shall I?
I'll just say so much. There are 8 identified resilience bins. And this is one of my favorite things to explain about how in the weeds they got is there is even a fund for information technology infrastructure resilience. And if you can show that your internet might have problems due to resilience related issues, there is a grant fund related to it. So there are 8 major bins and they touch on really every topic. But there's a huge caveat, and the caveat is these funds have to be applied for by your locality, and they are complicated. It is a monster book, and look at me. I like to read very boring policy documents, and it was a slog to get through this. And so we have so many localities around the state that don't even have a staffer that could do this work. They don't have anyone thinking about resilience, let alone in a position to navigate a complicated federal process. And so while there is a lot of money out there, I have personally a lot of concerns about how it's going to move out around the state and whether or not there's going to be equity and distribution based on the resources that people have to be able to get in the door. And I'll pass it on to Andrea or Mary-Carson.
No, I mean, Jay, so great points. And are these direct to localities or are these pass-throughs via the state? That's the other concern that I have, right? And it is our state, is the Commonwealth of Virginia actively going after these? Because if they have to go through the state, how does that look? But I do know, for example, Jay, well, I'll let you answer that. So you went off.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a mixed bag depending on what fund you're looking at. So if you're looking at the Infrastructure Act, or if you're looking at the Inflation Reduction Act, it's a different process. But a lot of the dollars that are project specific are localities that have to go for it. And then there are some big bins. You know, VDOT can go after transportation dollars, and there are some resilience transportation dollars. They have their own issues, like you can take 50% off the top and use it for non-resilience related transportation projects, which is weird. But so there will be dollars that go directly to Virginia, to some of our agencies, but there will also be dollars that flow directly into localities. And
so one of the things, I'm sorry, Jay. I was just going to say we have an arborist, chief arborist for the city of Norfolk, because we're lucky to have that. And he was explaining that tree plantings, increasing our tree canopy, there's huge dollars in the Inflation Reduction Act, as particularly if there's no match, which is huge for previously redlined areas. So it deals with an equity thing, which is awesome. So that's one of the things that we're going to be pursuing, because trees, of course, great for water quality, great for erosion, flooding, et cetera. So we're excited about that. So Jay, I just to add on to that question though. So the city of Norfolk was really fortunate to receive $400 million from the Infrastructure Act, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, to start. It's a new start for our Army Corps Coastal Storm Risk Management Plan. That's amazing because it's a $1.8 billion plan. The problem is, well, there's several. We have to come up with a 35% non-federal match. So just for that first $400 million tranche, that's $215 million. The city of Norfolk can't come up with those dollars alone. We have to get help from the state government. So again, remember the RGGI funds that provide for the community flood protection, or CFPF, that's about $150 to $200 million a year. So we're talking about that one tranche for just the city of Norfolk. So that's a huge issue. So we are making a big ask to the governor right now to help us with this. So we'll see what happens there. But that's another big piece of the puzzle. With some of these funds from the federal government are going to have these match requirements. And that's going to, even city of Norfolk, we're going to be better in position than our smaller localities around the Commonwealth.
And we got a question for Andrea, and then any of our panelists can chime in on this. So if Governor Youngkin finds a way to take Virginia out of RGGI, is there a path for the General Assembly to come up with revenue sources for these programs that are currently funded by RGGI? Or would we become totally dependent on federal funding? Or I don't know, what's the sort of, what do you see happening if Virginia leaves RGGI?
Well, first of all, I don't believe that the governor can leave RGGI. I think this is a General Assembly action. I feel strongly about that. I don't think that Jay is much smarter than I am in state politics. I'm trying to get there, but I really feel like that's going to be an issue. So hopefully the brick wall of the Senate will disallow that from happening. But if that were to be the case, the fact of the matter is, the governor talks about wanting to help with flooding issues, but there was no funding mechanism for this. And again, to Jay's point, this is not a one-off thing. This has to be ongoing. This is not going anywhere. It's going to get worse. This is the thing that just is like mind-blowing to me. Why are we not talking about this more, folks? Where is the funding coming for this? And this Reggie option is one of those things that it's not a lot, but at least it's something. And then we want to get rid of it. I'm sorry. Jay, take it over because I'm going to start expletives are going to start coming out of my mouth.
Well, if you're going to start cursing, I'll let you go. That seems good. But we don't. It's to answer your question bluntly, we don't have funds. When we talk about these funds, this Community Flood Preparedness Fund comes under the Department of Conservation and Recreation. That comes under the Secretary of Natural Resources. In Virginia, we're lucky if 1% of the budget goes to natural resources in any year. We set this goal, years ago with all the businesses and conservation groups, and we got together and we said, let's make 2% of the Virginia budget go to the environment. And we never got there, folks. We've never even come close. And so the idea that we're gonna just give up this dedicated revenue stream and that we'll magically suddenly start investing general funds in this sector in a way that history has proven we have never once done is very difficult to believe. I will also say it's November. The General Assembly is right around the corner. I've read every agency's ask. There was no money to go into the Community Flood Preparedness Fund from general fund dollars. It's still all Reggie. So unless we see a miracle rabbit out of a hat, if we were to get out of Reggie in the next year, we would go to $0 in this fund over the next year as they went out the door. So it's not, I think there's a lot of people that, I don't want to say disingenuously because maybe they really are trying, but have kept saying, we'll come up with the money somewhere else. And, in case you haven't seen a newspaper, the likelihood of Virginia continuing to see record revenues is very, very, very small. We're very likely headed towards a shrink of our budget over the next 2-year budget. And that is the worst time for you to go ask for a new line of general funds for flooding. And so I can't put a bigger exclamation point on how insane it is for us to consider getting out of Reggie right now at a time when those revenues are driving our entire resilience program.
And just to turn to just the individual home level, let's say that you are a homeowner and you are experiencing flooding challenges in your home, and you want to take advantage of the VCAP program. What's a good place to start? Do you start by reaching out to a contractor to figure out what type of work should be done? Are there certain consultants available with local governments who can help you kind of identify the types of solutions you should be trying to seek funding for? What's a good place to start?
Yeah, definitely start with your district because everyone's different. So there'll be a VCAP coordinator at the Soil and Water District. We also have a state VCAP coordinator, and her name's Blair. She's wonderful. She can point you to all the right resources, but start with your local district. And in a lot of places, if you want to do a living shoreline, they will have a contractor that they always use, or they'll have a nonprofit that they always use. And our districts don't have to be experts at all of these things. They facilitate by providing the resources, and they will have a network in place to make it happen. But start with your VCAP coordinator, and they will tell you what you need to have done to make it happen.
Okay, great, thanks. And I'm curious for Andrea, so you lobbied very hard for the Commonwealth Flood Board. What's the resistance to creating a board like that? What sort of feedback have you heard on that? And how do you what are ways that we can help overcome that resistance? What are the counter arguments?
Oh my gosh, how much time do we have? So I've got to say, Jay, Mary-Carson, Wetlands Watch, So many were involved in this last year. This is going to take a while, right? You know, the Commonwealth Transportation Board took many, many years to create. So it's complicated. And what we really need is a JLARC study of what's happening on all the various secretariats in the Commonwealth. But the problem is to get a JLARC study, it's like get in line. There's, I don't know, Jay, how many people want a JLARC study? 250 people. You know, so it's going to be a big lift. Some of the other issues, we've got some pushback. You know, the conservation community really wants to lead, understandably, and I agree with this, with nature-based solutions. Others, and from a different political perspective, say no, just put up a bunch of concrete, right? So it's just there's a little bit of a tension there as well, and you know, there's just a lot of education that needs to happen, and people just don't understand this space. Some people will say, flooding, it's always happened, nothing's new, right? You know, there's the climate deniers. But the fact of the matter is, you know, if we can take causality out of the equation, which I hate because we all know that there's issues here, you know, the folks, this should not be a partisan issue. It's not even a geographic issue. This is hitting all of Virginia. So we've just got to continue to focus on how do we educate, how do we advocate, how do we bring more people on into the fold, bipartisan, a lot of different areas of support. It's a matter of national security. It's a matter of economic security. It's a matter of personal security. So this is where we've got to go. It's going to take a while. But I'm here for the long haul. So is Jay. He's really young. So we've got a few years left.
Well, I will also give you all, since I'm here, you can get the newest information as of this morning. So that question that Andrea and HRPDC worked on so hard in terms of who should quarterback our resilience, how should that look in Virginia? It almost went to a study bill. And then died on a General Assembly technicality, but they have since taken that exact same bill and are now creating the work group without legislation. And this morning, the work group, it was decided that the work group will be moderated by Virginia Commonwealth University's public policy program, and the first meeting is expected before year's end. So we are inching ever so slowly towards this conversation, but a report is due November 1 of 2023 to the governor and the General Assembly for the work group's action. So this will be a conversation that's hot and heavy over the next year, but after that work group, expect legislation.
And Stephanie, real quickly, I just want to note Mary-Carson's comment in the chat about local governments and bringing into the issue. This is not a partisan issue. So we had the city of Virginia Beach last year in 2021. They passed a bond referendum to tax them for $562 million, I think it was, by 76%. That's amazing. People know this is an issue. And that is going to be, I mean, this is just going to increasingly be part of the conversation. So it's an education campaign. It's really, it's incumbent upon your local governments, your leaders, you all as interested individuals, grassroots leaders, to just continue to push this issue. I mean, we need your help. We definitely need your help. Politicians, elected officials respond to constituents. And so you all being here today to want to know more, thank you, thank you, thank you. Just continue to spread the word.
Great, thank you. And I want to ask what this group is, are you referring to the working group morph into the grantee awardee or administrator for local needs? Oh, maybe the Commonwealth Flood Board, is that what you're referring to, Wanda?
Yeah, Yeah, so what it's being called is the Resilient Entity Working Group. And that is because they couldn't decide if they want it to be a board or if they want it to be an authority. So we've settled on the completely alien and government term of entity. And so the group will work that out over the next year, what type of entity we would like it to be. But that is exactly the question it will be tackling, as well as a few other things that the DCR director and secretary seem to have thrown on the plate. But, how does Virginia get the most bang for our buck, the most return on investment of limited resilience dollars? And how do we make sure that all of our agencies and secretariats that are in this sandbox, which the more you look, the more you realize it's everyone, how do you coordinate those efforts to make sure they are working in concert to best serve the citizens and resources of the state? So just an easy question. We'll knock it out quick, I'm sure.
Thanks, Jay. And for folks who are interested in advocating for keeping Virginia and Reggie and continuing to fund these important programs, are there certain, I think, sort of on the ground stories are really helpful for advocacy and examples of, good work that the programs are accomplishing. Are there certain stories that kind of stick out to you as to why, the things that these programs are accomplishing? Is there kind of a place where we can look at information about the individual grants and sort of identify stories that resonate with us?
So I know that the HRPDCs had a really great presentation on this, and I'm sorry I don't have that link in front of me, talking about the money that has flowed to our region and Hampton Roads, for example, but also throughout the Commonwealth. I think that would be really helpful. So I'll put that on my homework list to get to you so that we can provide that to folks. But yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And I don't know if there's one resource that's leading this effort. Jay, Mary-Carson.
Yeah, I put a link in the chat. The Virginia Conservation Network has a really nice resource that shows where the funding has been allocated with an interactive map. I think that's probably everybody's best bet for the first stop. If you want to find out more, you can click on the projects and a little one-pager fact sheet comes up for each project. Wetlands Watch on our website has a page dedicated to the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, and we are working very closely with VCN as is CBF to update the information on their website as well. So it's kind of, I think the resources are probably a good place for folks to start. But I would look at projects and reach out to your local government.
And
I was just gonna say, Mary-Carson just did my homework for me. So there she is.
And I would just add from a stylistic approach, if you want to advocate for Reggie right now, go find the businesses that have benefited from these projects and have them weigh in, because that is who's going to move the needle with this administration. They tell me every time we talk, they want to hear from the business community. And so if you can identify local businesses, if you have a relationship with your chamber, they need to be the ones that are lending their voice to this effort. I think we're starting to see, as we're in grant rounds 3 1/4, we have seen a lot of localities that were quiet on this topic have started to come out of the woodwork. And so many major localities have sent letters to the governor, but we need the business community to do the same now and say, look, this is just a question of bottom line for us. We need people to get to our building and be safe there.
Thank you for that, those suggestions. And I know a lot of us will take that to heart and go forth and advocate for and make sure that we are continuing these really important programs. So I want to thank all of our panelists, and we will send out the video to everyone as soon as we can.